Oh, hi, everybody. My name is Matt Storrs, and welcome to Mattsplaining. On today's episode, I have an expert on who I'm very excited to speak with. Expert, please introduce yourself and tell us what you're an expert in.
Hi, I'm Eva. I am a PhD student in microbiology. Specifically, I'm a viral immunologist and I study dengue virus.
Dengue virus, fantastic. I feel like I know quite a bit about the dengue virus. And I think a lot of people, when they think of the dengue virus, they think of the last 100 years of various infections. They think of maybe malaria and how we invented quinine and how we got tonic water and how it effectively tastes like a poison. And unfortunately, we haven't found a way to get a new drink to fight other mosquito-based infections. And I think that's really where most of the research is these days when it comes to these viruses, is finding a new drink mix that we can put in and mix with our various alcohols, whether it be gin, whiskey, bourbon, and giving a greater flavor profile, but also having ways to protect people and trying to make something that's a little bit tastier than quinine. Because personally, I don't know what your feelings are on tonic, but it tastes like poison. Like there's so much sugar in it, but it tastes so bad, and it my body rejects it every time, and it makes me like it has a mouthfeel that really upsets me, and I just don't like it. And ultimately, as time has progressed, there also has been a number of kind of cultural dynamics that have connected to these viruses, with the malaria turned into a very famous dance called the merengue. It actually got developed based on malaria, and the kind of the symptoms manifest. When you see the merengue, it's very much a hip-based dance, and that is kind of to evoke the various discomforts that people would have. And similarly, in recent times with dengue fever, we have people trying to develop new dances based on dengue. So one of the most popular dances, I'm not sure about the pronunciation, but it's similar to dengue. They have, still with the hip movements, many gyrations and what have you. And what happens when you go through this is that you start feeling a lot of cramping. You start feeling a lot of fatigue and muscle aches. You might develop a rash, because very often this is performed in the clubs that have the foam parties. Those are not that popular these days, but they want to keep people as clean as possible because they are trying to promote the idea of cleanliness and, you
Did you
know,
say thumb parties?
oh, foam, like they create like a soapy foam and then they release it, and so it's like you're like dancing in a bathtub,
Oh,
if that makes sense. And
yeah,
so,
yeah, yeah, like bubbles.
yes, like bubbles, but like the really frothy bubbles. And
Gotcha,
so
gotcha.
yeah, so you're dancing in that. And the thing is, when they do that, they cut corners, these clubs that do this, and they're not getting the hypoallergenic bubbles and foam that are getting created. They're getting industrial strength soaps, and that leads to rashes. But when you're dancing the dengue, what happens is it kind of starts mimicking the symptoms that people might have when they get dengue fever. And so like that actually helps to promote people's understanding of the disease outside of them being bitten by mosquitoes and like having to actually deal with the more serious ramifications of it. And they can say, yeah, I danced the dengue and I survived, as opposed to I got it and I survived, but I've had these lasting conditions. And then I think that besides being a dance that's sweeping the nation, sweeping internationally, to help promote the fact that there is this very dangerous disease out there, I think that there are a lot of people out there that are much like you, trying to focus on finding ways to get knowledge out about it, as well as find new ways to treat it and to eradicate it as best as possible. And obviously, if not eradicate it, find a new drink additive to help prevent it. Now, based on what you've heard so far, about how much of that would you say was accurate?
Goodness. See, accurate is an interesting word. I think you have a very unique perspective. I loved the parallel with quinine and then thinking about tonic water. I haven't thought about either of those things. And I
Okay.
think a lot of experts in the field also haven't thought about that aspect of things. And I think it just shows how important getting other perspectives and expertise and collaborating with people in other fields are to coming up with really creative, innovative solutions.
I appreciate you saying that, but I have a feeling that you are being far too kind to me. But yeah, tell me what it is that you do and what got you interested in it.
Yeah, so like I said, I'm a PhD student. I am a viral immunologist, microbiologist by training, and my specific project is on dengue virus and studying the human immune response, specifically the innate immune response to dengue virus.
Tell me about dengue fever.
Dengue virus is actually the most common mosquito or arthropod transmitted virus in the world. It's actually estimated that roughly, or about 400 million people, are at risk of getting dengue. It's transmitted by the same mosquito that Zika and yellow fever are transmitted by. And so, as we see with the risk of global warming, as these mosquitoes are able to live in certain, like, more areas that they normally wouldn't be able to because of increasing global temperatures, we're seeing more and more areas affected and at risk of contracting dengue. And actually, this year and last year are like the highest cases we've seen pretty much ever, if not for a very long time, and specifically in the Americas.
Hmm.
So there have been 2024 in the Americas, like North America, South America, Central, like have there's actually been a record-breaking number of dengue cases. And for the first time, we're actually seeing dengue cases move into the United States, specifically in Florida, having locally contracted infections. There are some travel associated infections that people report back after traveling.
Hmm.
But as of this year and last year, we're actually really starting to see an increase in dengue cases in the United States. So it's definitely huge risk and definitely climbing.
Hmm.
And okay, so why do we, yes, it's really common. Why do we care? How bad is it? Well, when you first get dengue, it tends to be like either mild or even asymptomatic, or you just get like not specific symptoms, like you just feel like you have a cold or a flu, you could develop a rash, but it's not really anything like very telltale specific, like with Lyme disease, you get like the very specific, they call it like a bullseye
Hmm.
rash, right? When you
Hmm.
get infected with something, your body learns like, oh, okay, like that's the enemy, and you develop antibodies
Hmm.
that are basically specific weapons to that certain pathogen, so that when you get reinfected, your response is quicker and stronger because your immune cells are like, hey, I know that guy. He's on the wanted posters.
Hmm.
And they already have like the kryptonite or like the Achilles heel, like kind of prepped, right?
Totally.
So that's what usually happens with most things that our bodies come across. The reason that it has been so challenging to develop a truly, really effective dengue vaccine against all four kind of flavors of dengue is that antibodies to dengue, so they stick,
I
but the
see.
dengues are more like kind of cousins. And so it uses your immune system against you, so that it actually uses your antibodies to enter cells that maybe it wouldn't necessarily be able to at first, and you actually get enhanced infection. It's harder to diagnose cases right away. However, in a small subset of cases, you can have more severe disease. the where dengue gets really dangerous is that if you get infected with dengue again, so if you get a second infection, like during COVID, I don't know how many times have you had COVID, right? Like,
Right, right.
so if that happens with dengue and you get it again with a different flavor, so using the COVID analogy because we all know
Hmm.
essentially, like let's say you got the initial like Wuhan strain and then you
Hmm.
got Omicron,
Right.
right? If you get dengue one and then after you get dengue two, three, or four, you're actually your disease is going to be much more severe. And that's where you're more likely to develop worse symptoms like dengue hemorrhagic fever, dengue shock syndrome, and people die and it gets pretty nasty. And so that's also kind of the main contributing reason why it's been so historically challenging to develop an effective dengue vaccine across the four flavors or types of dengue that I mentioned. So there's dengue one through four. And because it basically goes against what your body does when it sees infections again, which is the whole concept of developing immunity and like why we have vaccines. It's to train your body against a certain pathogen so that when you see it again, the immune response is faster, you don't get as sick, you recover faster. Dengue kind of flips it on its head, right? Because
Hmm.
if you get it again, you're actually risking more sickness and more disease. And so, yeah, my project is kind of related to that and developing an effective and safe for all age groups and no matter how many time like people who have seen dengue before, people who haven't, because there are a few vaccines available. Currently, there's only one that's licensed in the US,
Hmm.
Dengvaxia, but it's only approved for children, I think up to teenagers or so,
Hmm.
and only in children who already have pre-existing like immunity to dengue, so they already have been infected with one strain of dengue.
Oh, wow. It seems like that's a very small number of people that would be able to use that then.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, it's not advised as like a travel vaccine or like yellow fever vaccine, but you get it
Hmm.
if you're traveling or because then it could basically be doing the opposite of what you want a vaccine to do. And instead of protecting you, leaving you susceptible to even more severe disease.
That's heavy. That's very, very frightening. You keep mentioning the flavors, and I might be a little bit off base and a little bit kind of stuck on this thought, but like with the quinine connection,
Yeah.
are any like how would you describe dengue one, two, three, and four if they were flavors? Would one of them be like sweet or salty, or is it a little too far outside the realm of what these strains are to kind of break them down in more flavor profiles?
Oh, I love this question. And I think the reason that I actually use the word like flavor is because I was thinking about your like quinine drink analogy. So
Hmm.
I might ramble on and like info dump a lot, but that's
That's okay.
basically
I
specifically so specifically I am looking at the differences in dengue 2 and dengue 4 because
uh-huh.
it's so fascinating that these viruses are so like they are the same virus, but they're not because they're so different. And actually, what we see clinically and then also in the lab is that specifically dengue 4, if you get dengue 4, even the first time, you're going to feel pretty crappy. You're probably going to have a high fever. You may even be hospitalized, but the chances are pretty high that you're gonna recover, right?
Hmm.
Like it's gonna suck. Obviously, if you get any of these dengues, it's gonna suck. You're gonna feel like a bad flu, like even like achy, like but in general, dengue 4 we say is more inflammatory.
I
So
see.
you just feel kind of worse, right?
Hmm.
But the good thing about that is it's kind of like all at once kind of thing, and then eventually you're more likely to recover.
Hmm.
Whereas if you initially kind of get sick with like dengue 2, maybe the first time isn't as bad. It's not, your body isn't mounting as strong of an immune response, but it's specifically secondary exposures to dengue 2. So, like I was saying about repeat infections, that is more likely to result in severe disease like dengue hemorrhagic fever, like dengue shock syndrome. And actually, my thesis project is looking specifically at the differences with dengue 2 and dengue 4 and really trying to get at the molecular differences and trying to pinpoint what it is about these viruses that basically controls the immune response in this way. Like, why is dengue 4 so much stronger? So I would
Hmm.
say dengue 4 is maybe like pretty spicy.
I see.
And then I would say dengue 2 is like, I don't know. I also want to say spicy, but the differences in spices were like, it's like at first, like when you like chilies or something, like when you
Hmm.
like you have chili powder, it's like, oh, like it burns, and then it's like you kind of get over it.
Right.
While as with like a jalapeno or like a habanero, like it lingers
Right.
and it just like you can't get rid of it. I would say that like dengue 4 is like a chili pepper, and then dengue 2 is like like a habanero pepper. And then yeah.
I like it. I like that. I like that analogy.
Dengue 1 and 3 aren't as like commonly studied. I don't
Hmm.
really know why. Our lab specifically looks at the differences of dengue 4 and dengue 2, but they behave more similarly to dengue 2. So it's kind of dengue 1, 2, and 3 have more similar profiles, and then dengue 4 is just like really strong, like gangbuster out the gate, really alerts your body kind of thing. But yeah, I think so. Yeah, because like I mentioned, there is a huge current outbreak in the Americas right now, and even since last summer. So in Argentina, there was like a whole like national like health emergency, and like Mexico, I think I don't remember if it was dengue 1 or dengue 3, but it was one of those.
Hmm.
I think for the most part, testing doesn't necessarily differentiate between the serotypes because also maybe that's not the primary interest because I think like I don't want to say treatment because we don't have any actual treatment, but
Hmm.
like symptom mitigation is the same, hospitalized and then just like I don't know, dealing with the infection and just like taking your anti-inflammatory like Advil. Like I'm not clinical, so I
Yeah. Yeah. That's
don't
totally
really
fine.
want to speak
No.
on like the what they actually do. But it is important to note that like there are no antivirals, there are really no therapeutic interventions, there are no treatments. There are a few vaccine candidates available or in the works, but we still don't have a super like A plus effective, accessible vaccine that's protective against all four serotypes and repeat infections in all populations and levels of exposure.
There's one clarifying note that we wanted to add after the episode. So, Eva was kind enough to send an audio file, so I'm going to include that here.
There are no antivirals, no really therapeutics or cures or treatments. It's just all about prevention. And the prevention just comes at protecting yourself from mosquitoes. So besides, just like wearing long clothing, covering up loose skin, wearing bug spray, and with like netting or staying indoors, I guess the best thing you could do is just be wary and cautious about any still water you leave lying around, specifically like bird baths or like buckets, like collecting water or anything. And then also just be aware of dengue as a possibility if you do get sick and consider getting tested.
This is absolute news to me. I was wondering if there's any place that people could go to learn more about you or learn more about dengue fever.
Yeah, so if you want to learn more about dengue, more than even I could ever say, honestly, just the CDC website, cdc.gov, and you just read like the dengue page, they have a lot of great information there. If you're more of a listener, which if you're listening to this podcast, here's another podcast recommendation. One of my favorites is called This Podcast Will Kill You, and they cover a new like infectious disease or disease every episode, and they do a really, really good job of presenting information in a really accessible way to everyone, and it's fun. And I'm not endorsed by them. They don't know I exist, but I love them.
Mm.
And then as for me, I am on Instagram at Eva, like forever with underscores instead of spaces. And then it's FOR, not the number four. And then what I also would love to plug is I will actually be performing off Broadway from August 28th through September 8th in a new musical. It's called Lifeline, and it tells the story of antibiotics and the discovery of penicillin to the very current, real, growing threat of antibiotic resistance. And it's awesome. It's really, really cool. It's amazing. And the chorus is actually entirely composed of scientists and healthcare professionals, which is just really cool. So I'm
That's
one of
so
them.
cool.
Yeah, it's really cool. And we could do a whole other episode on antibiotics and antibiotic resistance. But the TLDR important thing I can leave you with is one, don't just like jump to antibiotics. Don't ask your doctor for antibiotics if you don't know for sure that it's a bacterial infection. It could be viral. Trust your doctor. And if you are prescribed antibiotics, please finish your dose. Always
Totally.
finish your dose. If there's one
Always.
thing you remember, like even if you start to feel better, like you have to finish your full course of antibiotics because you're just killing the weak bacteria, and then the strong bacteria like acquire resistance, and then you are personally contributing to the problem. So if you don't want to do that, please finish your dose because we rely on antibiotics so much as a society. It's really a problem. And if you want to learn more about it, come see Lifeline at the Signature Theater in New York, or visit lifelinemusical.com for tickets and more information.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I can't thank you enough. This has been so insightful. I hope people check out the musical and have learned a lot today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was fun. I loved your flavor question. I still don't have like maybe like dengue 1 and dengue 3. Like I guess maybe just like sweet and salty. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Excellent. Excellent.
Maybe umami because they're like
Uma.
underrated.
Fantastic. My name is Matt Storrs, and this has been Mattsplaining. Before we go today, I want to thank Ryan Lawson, my dear friend, for making the theme music for Mattsplaining. Ryan can be reached at beatblenderstudios@gmail.com or at Beat Blender Studios on Instagram and TikTok.